Okay, perfect. Then let's dive into it. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be a guest today at the DiscoPosse podcast. And yeah, let's dive right into it.
All right, fantastic. So, Jess, thank you so much for joining today. One of the things that I love about our tech ecosystem is that I get to meet new people through friends and through colleagues that are, unlikely opportunities that turn into fantastic opportunities because we got to meet almost randomly at an event for so I've got friends who work at another company. They were hosting an event in New York. We had an opportunity to meet there, and it took me about 19 seconds to realize that you were somebody so interesting I wanted to spend the day learning about you. So
Wow, I feel
uh,
very honored. And I can do even the opening of this podcast. I mean, that's wonderful.
So, for folks that are brand new to you, if you want to do a quick sort of introduction about yourself, and we'll talk about Loyee and what you're doing, but your own storied background is incredible. So, we're likely going to talk kind of a lot about how you got here, but then how it's actually really, really infusing into what you're doing with the platform and the approach, because people often say this. They see a product, they're like, "Oh, wow, this person just came up with this idea." And you're like, "Yeah, 14 years ago, and now it's finally the technology's caught up to be able to do some of these things." So this it's going to be a fun one, and I can tell in advance. The only thing I'm going to wish we had more of was more Jess time. So let's not burn anymore. Just let's hear about your backstory.
Yeah, so thanks for having me here today. I'm Jess, and I'm the founder of a company called Loyee. And I'm originally from Europe. So I grew up in Germany, as people might hear. And my parents are immigrants to Germany. So my first language was Slovak and Czech. So now I would say I am a double immigrant to the US. And yeah, that's where we met, right? In New York. And yeah, I know you have plenty of questions for me here, but like as a brief intro, I'm on my startup attempt number 3. It's a go-to-market startup. That's how we also connected, right? Through Go-to-Market Delta, a name that I really admire. And what we do is we help other companies identify their ICP quickly and penetrate using that ICP being like very fast in penetrating their market and help them with account research, prioritization, scoring along the way. So we can dive deeper into that. I did my PhD in financial economics and studied computer science. Didn't finish it though, but a lot of what we are building now actually had his roots in my past. So yeah, definitely coming from like a finance background that is tech focused, and yeah, cannot wait to chat more about it.
Well, the interesting thing is, I find everybody that has a school they didn't finish, inevitably they build a startup in that exact thing, because you usually reach a point where you're like, I know all I need to know. It's time to just get to business.
Let's get to
Now, sometimes
business.
there's
Yeah.
financial and timing and other things but inevitably there is a reason you got started down that path. And it's kind of like, so for me, it was like project management and a lot of the like operational organizational stuff. I hate it. Oh, I'm terrible at it. But I always took courses so I could be ready, so I knew the fundamentals, just so that I could purely hand it off. And it made me a better, you know, delegator of
Hmm.
understanding more than tasks. Because because you have finance background and then you have an understanding of technology, you don't need to build the system yourself, but you need to be able to relay requirements, especially when it's a very technical product, which people don't realize. Like, getting into what we're doing around shortening the cycle to defining ICPs, helping sales teams, helping founders really like accelerate their first 18 months in the startup, getting to the point where you're building a sales process and methodology and mapping it out. Like this stuff, it sounds very salesy, but it's super technical because of all the stacks you've got to glue together. And then on top of that, you have to have a deep understanding of human psychology and how people don't do the stuff, which is why we need products and platforms that help us glue these things together. Because inevitably, find me anything that plugs into a CRM, and I'll find you something that is lacking sales data because salespeople don't write stuff in CRMs. So this is why we do things, like tap with Loyee and this is why it's important, because the more intelligence we can feed into the system without relying on the humans to go chasing it, it's just let's seed those people to let them succeed faster. So anyways, let's talk about
Absolutely.
let's talk
And
about
I,
Loyer and the platform sort of approach. Where did it come from?
yeah, oh my God. So, two things that kind of navigated us to where we are at. So, as I said, I had a fintech company before, and we were selling to banks and hedge funds. And I was more the technical co founder, but I realized how difficult sales is. But, I was working with Nobel laureates and like was a name in academia, and then all of a sudden like entrepreneur that no one knows, and put into sales, like basically an SDR role. So obviously I felt miserable, but I did not know what was worse, like doing like these repetitive tasks, or like really not knowing how to best approach it. And I'm talking here as an early stage founder, right? Like, okay, you have this market, so how can we execute on that market fastest? That was always like the equation to solve. And within my PhD, I was working a lot on NLP projects, natural language processing. So this is basically textual data before LLMs existed. And I was scraping a lot of insights on the web on companies to see like what are their business models, their strategies, initiatives. And I basically used this to create like a little system for me to help me with the sales. Now, the sales was very challenging. The product didn't work out. The company is now in liquidation. But this insight and this tech is now used at Loyee, which is kind of cool because we realized it's not only like a small startup problem, but it's actually the problem is even bigger the larger the organization gets. Because in a small startup, you have very few people that need to align on an ICP. In a large organization, you have many people that need to align on an ICP. And part of my background is in behavioral economics. So I was actually working with a Nobel Prize laureate. He won a Nobel Prize in 2017 for behavioral economics. And, as you said in this podcast right at the beginning, as humans are not very rational individuals. And the problem is that we are either lazy or have limited cognitive capabilities, or just different preferences that don't align always with our best interests. And that's where we need, or where we have the beauty of tech to help us conquer these biases, these
Yeah.
heuristics that we bring in, day out. And yeah, Loyee is one of those platforms that helps companies understand who to go after and why, based on data on the web. And I can share a little bit more later. And then, help with the number one problem, get customers as fast as possible. And we are talking about the right customers. So, yeah, that's the little summary here.
Well, and this is the thing that often slows down those first growth years is a continuous shift in market message, a continuous shift in targeting, and a misunderstanding of how to do experiments and actually measure consistency and measure effectiveness. And this is why it is such a nuanced thing. And I've always thought that we need a Kahneman and Tversky for tech sales. like, because this is what we're missing. We have raw, numerical data, and but then we have behavioral heuristics, which we know we've seen it play out. Like, and I literally saw this myself. Like, I'm a founder, and I used to joke with people. So I'm a nerd at heart. So I'm a technologist. I would go and sit on customer calls with my previous startup, and like I was there as a tech evangelist. So I'm like there to just talk about the nerd bits and excite the people about the technology. And we would do that. And then in the end, as I realized I was telling the same story repeatedly, they realized like, oh, you can actually help to nudge the needle, because you're connecting with the people in a different way than the sales team does. And I said, yeah, yeah, because I'm pulling extra information from them just naturally. I do technical discovery without even realizing it. Because I'll ask you, things like, oh, that's neat. You're using, product X. I'm curious, how long have you been using it? Oh, what else do you use? And very simple, almost throwaway questions would unlock these insights that they didn't realize. And then I would teach them to like, hey, every time you're about to meet with a company, why don't you go and check AWS reInvents, speaker slots and KubeCon and all these things. I said, I would bet you this company has sent their engineers to do public speaking at a bunch of these events. And I said, so find them, find out what they talked about, and then ask them, like, tell them, like, do additional research. And by doing these like tiny things, it changed a lot of how our technical sales motion went, just by teaching them different ways to find information. But it's not scalable. Like, there's obviously that's great if you're an AE and you got a researcher and you've got a couple SDRs on your team, but that's just not scalable.
Mm. Oh my God, I could talk about this topic forever. So first of all, it's so true. Everybody needs a little nudge. So you know exactly who won this Nobel Prize in 2017. I was working for Richard Thaler on his Nudging Forever paper. And that's how I ended up there. And I met Daniel Kahneman, so which was probably one of my biggest personal achievements. But it's so true. Back in the days before AI now became such a thing, really we really needed software to nudge us or managers to nudge us to do and not forget things and get ideas, right? To how to become better salespeople, basically. I think now with AI is we don't need to nudge anymore. We can use AI to automate it for us, which is super cool and powerful if you think about it. So we will have just more time to use our brains and do the right things. I mean, isn't that cool?
Yeah. Well, like one of the interesting heuristics, and people always used to tell me that like you must have like a lot of, you take a lot of notes, to be able to remember all this stuff. It's like I actually take very minimal notes, and I continuously like look for organizational cues from the outside, because I internally I have ADHD, I've got dyslexia, I've got a whole host of exciting neuroses that are fun to carry around. It's a party in my brain at every moment. But for me, what I would do is like by repeating certain almost like mantra like things of like, do the thing, send the follow up email, double check their 10K, like take a look for this. And I would build these processes so that I
Hmm.
wouldn't have to remember the processes. By saying it over and over and again in my head, I would sort of self memorize. And then I would take that and then try and convert it to a methodology. And I was always like, I want to make this a methodology that's easy to practice, because if I have to remember a to-do list in my head constantly, then that's what I'm
Hmm.
focusing on, is memorizing. But that's not what I want to do. I want to focus on value creation. And me memorizing the grocery lists is unnecessary. The reason why I use my GPS, and I used to use the GPS as a way to help me augment my own knowledge of the path. Now I get in my car, I tap the GPS for going to the grocery store. It's four kilometers away, but I don't want to care. It made me like, hey, go a different way today because there's a police barricade for some accident that happened. I'm like, fantastic. I don't care how I get there. I trust
Hmm.
implicitly in this technology. And it fundamentally
Hmm.
changed so that now while I'm on this drive, I'm not thinking about, should I go this route? Should I get off early? I literally just don't care. It just tells me turn here. All right, fantastic. So all that time I'm thinking about what am I going to do while I'm there? What's the follow-up plan to do like as simple as groceries. I'm now focusing on the
Yeah.
value I'm creating by the trip I'm on instead of what's the best way to get to there and back.
Wow, yeah, that's so true. I never even thought about this. It's a really beautiful anecdote. And yeah, and now you can think of, okay, other things, right? Instead of like, should I go left or right? Now you just can follow on autopilot. You trust the system. But yeah, it gives you space for creativity for other things. No, that's really beautiful. And that's how I see also our product a little bit. Like, you know how there is always like this conversation about, whoa, AI SDRs are going to replace SDRs. You know, like I don't even want to be part of that discussion, to be honest. Like, other than I'm just hearing left and right that all companies that were using AI SDRs this year were burning a little bit their fingers or leads, or I don't know how to say it. But it's really about like enabling people and give them the space so that they can do greater things. And what we do, and it goes a little bit into the approach that you had, that you described, is, you know, companies come to us, and it doesn't matter if it's early stage startup or like even the company that hosted this event, that is, I think, like a Series B company. You know,
Yeah.
something changes in the market. They want to change their go to market strategy. They want to go more up market. They need to really identify who they're going to sell to and how. And it's easy nowadays to go on Apollo or Zoom Info and get a large list. But randomly working off that large list or putting an AI SDR on top of that list will not bring you that growth that investors want to see, or that, you know, you as a founder want to see. Let's begin there. You have to be way more strategic about that. You have to actually understand first every lead in that list. And once you create like an overview of who is in that 10,000, 100,000 of leads, then you can create a strategy how to penetrate this list and go after it. Now, without technology, it's like a really difficult task to solve for, right? Because now it's like going from A to B, like you to the grocery store. There's so many different ways how to get there. And you know, your experience helps, you know, your parenting and doing a driver's license helps to find the fastest path. But you know, oftentimes we are so new to the job, we don't have experience on those markets yet. We have young folks that just came out of college. They lack any business acumen sometimes because it's not their field. So yeah, we have to give them the map, we have to give them the GPS on how to get there. And with tech, we can now screen all these 10,000, 100,000 accounts in your list and find the ones who have the highest likelihood to close and just go after them first. Like, go first to the accounts that we know are a good fit. Like, don't make it a random choice of AEs, SDRs to do their research, because when time is scarce and we are busy and mentally not there, we will anyways not do the research. We will just go blindly. And I think technology can really help us to give directions, to enable the reps also to come in with like the knowledge, why is an account important, why now? And they have just so much more and better conversations by the fact that that technology does the pre-work of pre-qualification. And that's yeah, where our systems fits in. That's what we actually do at Loyee.
My inner marketer always turns on when I hear the certain thing, and I just think of, if I would describe the flow that I understand is, you know, we turn data into knowledge and knowledge into intent, because that's what we really want. Like, we could call it knowledge all we want, but that's still requires human intervention and interpretation. But you're going
Mm,
further by actually defining and creating an understanding of the true intent of the buyer or prospective buyer. And intent can be human based, team based, division
mm,
based, company based, industry based. And
true.
every single layer of those has to combine together in the same way that there are multiple heuristics that apply to the same, you know, you get a variety of artifacts that feed into that system, and you have to take all these different environmental impacts in that the scale and scope that intent is being defined, and then narrow that down to like, hey, I want this SDR to get 10 pieces of information that are going to drive them towards closing that meeting, and then that
Yeah,
the AE can use to drive towards closing that sale. And that's the
absolutely. And there's
intent, is
so
always that goal, not just a bunch more data, which is like, oh, great, I filled your Salesforce full of goodies. You're like, no one's going to read it.
no, and that's the problem, right? Like at some point, like um data, like internally we don't have as much data that we can completely autonomous make decisions as of now. So the data we get, yeah, we collect a lot of data, but if you don't know why and how and why now, then actually this data is more noise than anything
Right.
else. So yeah, it's true. Like you need this reasoning behind it, the intent, and make sure that it's not so complex. Because if you now give 10, 20 signals to a rep, they will be easily overwhelmed and they again don't look at anything because
They
it's
go back
just
to a
like,
memorized script, right? Like that's the when they're lost, they always go back to the core, which is going to be, thank you for taking this call today. Let me begin with our deck. As you can see on the slide, we have shown you our like, and they do it by rote for the longest time until they do it by feel. And then, then you're unlocking the like the mind expanding, the the mind blown gif. It's like, oh,
yeah.
okay, when I actually get off the script and I get to the reason why the script was created, the intent of the script, wink, wink, right? As you try and tell people, intent is what matters. Like all the data knowledge in the world is going to be great, but you still have to understand intent, because you know what your intent is. My intent is to sell these people some things, and their intent is to not be sold things.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, that's the next point, right? Like right now, like we look at internal knowledge in the organization, like what closed, what is like a good customer you have, which doesn't mean that it closes like with the highest ACV, but you really look at, okay, what is a good customer? If you ask marketing, sales, customer success, they will all give you different answers. But it's fine. The idea is to look at those customers and really try to understand, okay, what makes them good, and then we enrich those customers with the data on the web. And why do we do that? We use the data on the web to find correlations between the characteristics of a good customer and then something that we can observe from the outside. Because at the end, when you get a big list, you also don't know everything internally.
Right.
So we have to approximate it. So that's why we work with actually a lot of publicly available resources, because we need just the approximation of what makes a good fitted account person, so on and so forth. And just having like a slight direction is already good enough from what is out there. And not 10 things, 20 things, 30 things. It's good as an overview, but at the end, you need one why now and why. And
Right.
that's good
Yeah.
enough. Give that the rep. Like if they have just one thing, it's way better than having three things, five things.
Yeah, well, and that is the interesting alternate challenge. In fact, the more data and the more knowledge and the more access to information that you provide these people, the more likely they are to revert to the simplest possible thing, which is it. I remember when I said this phrase, 2 months ago to somebody else, they ended
Mhm.
up signing. And now that is like, it's like a Pavlovian response that they're like, oh, okay, if I do that, repeat, and it sells again, that becomes their mantra. So no
Yeah.
sales data is going to change that. They're going to follow that thing, whether it's right or wrong, in the belief that it's influencing things. The same way that we think that when I talk about certain things, that I suddenly get ads for certain things. Well, I actually was doing more than just talking about it in the moment. I was actually doing other research and maybe have looked up other sites that have already influenced why ad data can be very accurate about human intent.
Mm.
But yet, there's nothing prior to what I've seen by what you are doing and like seeing how the platform works. Like I've never seen this is you are doing for sales teams what Google Ads has done for marketers, in
Mm.
that you've created an ecosystem that we've solved the stack problem, we've solved the data source problem, we've solved the summarization problem, and we've matched it with people that have an understanding of financial and psychological heuristics. So you're not just looking at it as a data gatherer, you're looking at it as a, how do I drive towards an outcome by managing and understanding intent? In the same way that, I said with thinking fast and slow and Thaler's work, like how much stuff look at all the research that Richard did. So Dr. Thaler, I should say. I say Richards if I know him, like, but
Well,
looking
people
at,
call him Dick.
yeah, that's right. Especially people that disagree with him. But hey, that's a different story. So but bold things that are tiny signals that came out of a vast amount of data. And it takes that like level of hunting and intent because it's very easy for us to get lost. But so your approach to it is like taking what's being done at a global level in finance and investing and then move this down into an area where you lived the experience. So you were doing sales, so you solved your own problem, and this is not simply a founder in search of a problem they can solve. It was like you were living this problem, and so you decided to solve the problem. It's bravo.
Well, yeah, I mean, right now we helped a lot of companies, but we need to help way more companies. But it's really interesting because right now, still on both ends are humans, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're talking about higher ACV contracts, like we still have sales reps, and we have to make it for them simpler. But what people oftentimes forget is actually we have to make it for the buyer simple, because the rep works with it every day in, day out. They know what is important, that if it's a good rep, but oftentimes the buyer doesn't even know what they need and what they don't need. So what you want to avoid is confusion on the buyer's end. The moment you put in 2 reasons, 3 signals, 5 reasons, might become confusing to the prospect. The moment something gets confusing and actually it just closes off completely. So you will never make a good sales or close a big deal when your prospect is confusing. So you will need to make it as clear and as simple as possible.
But especially given that the moment you're in when you're using this knowledge to understand the intent is the most difficult time to be doing those real-time assessments, because on looking for data, like you should be like you should already know as a sales rep what are the three things that I'm going to go for, but what's the one that's going to be the aha. So rule of threes, humans love that, right? And the same thing, it's like, don't give me 5 things you do great if 2 of them aren't great. Just give me 3 things. It may seem fun that we want to talk more, like, especially early stage startups. They were like, I want to talk about all this amazing stuff. You're like, no. Narrow down to a simple use case. The simple, like, what is the one use case that matters? And then when they're on that call, there's other intelligence and intents that they're gathering in real time that are so human that then they can concentrate on it. The whole purpose is to free the sales rep and free the potential buyer from needing to worry about the logistics. They just want to get into a conversation that actually matters to both of them. So the buyer wants to share just enough to be able to see whether this person understands their problem, and the seller wants to unpack enough requirements gathering so that they can
Hmm.
fit what is the goal for that ICP, and match it against their required capabilities and match it against their differentiated capabilities following that sales framework. Now, we've built these frameworks because we've learned that this is actually how humans work, right? In the same way that all of the work of Thaler and these folks work. The stuff that was all the stuff that just happened, and now we're learning how to describe it. But then they're going to get they're like, oh, they're going to get nerdy, and they're going to go, oh, I'm going to do all this research, and while I'm talking to this person, I'm talking with Jess, I'm going to be looking at her LinkedIn and be looking at all this. Like, no, that should have been what you did 5 minutes before the call, so that the last minute things that you can talk about. So when I'm talking to you, I love Loyee, and I would love to sell you how GTM Delta can work with Loyee, but I'm actually like I'm amazed by what you did with Dr. Thaler and like what your own background was. Like you did all these things. I want to learn about you. And then at the end, when you want to learn about my platform or my company, you understand how invested I am in caring about you as a human, so that it's very different. And when I like if you share your screen, so this is a sales trick too. Sorry, I'm talking way too much on this just because you always excite me about what is this gap that other products are like what you're doing is you're allowing people to be the best at what they can do that's not doable by AI. So when I get in and I tell somebody, can you share your screen if you don't mind? Let's take a look at your, your cloud interface or your product or your whatever it is, something. My favorite thing is they open their browser. And the first thing I do is okay, this is make sure you turn off your microphone and take a screenshot. Because what you're about to learn is everything about this human, because you're going to see them and they're going to see a bookmark bar at the top. And the far left is going to
Mhm.
be like, you know, two banks and, their kids, ballet schedule, and then Salesforce and whatever. You'll see a bunch of bookmarks and you'll see their tabs that are open. And I learn more about that person in 30 seconds of looking at their bookmark bar than I need to know. And I'll tell that to the sales team, like, take a look at this person. The farthest left they had was their two banks. So it means that they're financially aware, astute. So money's going to matter to them. So when we talk about the context of costs, make sure that that's upfront. You know, their kids are in ballet. So that's, they're artistic. Like there are small things that we can capture that are
Mm.
now in the same way that I don't have to worry about my trip to the grocery store. I'm thinking about what I'm going to be making tonight with what I buy from the grocery store. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do on this call because like Loyee set me up with like here's the fundamentals, and now I can look for the thing that makes you smile. I can look for the thing that makes you go, that's a good question. Like that's what we want. That's the purpose of the SDR and the AE. Like that's the purpose of the call, not to go, so let's review your 10K filing. And I noticed that it said that you have cybersecurity as a key component. Like it's just like,
Exactly.
oh, don't do that. Don't do that. Use tools to do this stuff. Don't waste your time.
Absolutely. No. Yeah, I'm just looking at my how do you say it, the book bar.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm like, I have like two, and one is like more for my private browser, and the other one is my work browser. So I'm like, okay, if you would ask me now to share my bar, I'm like, okay, luckily I'm on my work browser, because my private browser, you would see like a lot of investment and financial stuff. But
Yeah.
here, actually, it's kind of decent, like more work related.
And the real purpose of all that stuff is, again, it's the last minute signal stuff to create connection to, because that's really what the human part of it is about. Like great sales teams look, and I've learned this, like this is one thing I was always amazed by, is that a great seller can sell anything because they are not selling things, they are creating relationships and connections and mapping the buyer's journey to, like, there's all of this stuff that we can go back and we could write books about. But that's what they do. That's great, right? In the same way that what you did was you experienced this problem and you said, hey, look, I've got this incredible technology background. I've literally worked with some of the best, financial minds in the world, who've created understandings of heuristics that have unlocked global economies in ways that they could never have thought possible before. So when you can say like, okay, I can do all that stuff, but it's like, so what's my purpose in getting on the call? It's not to sell Loyer to five more people. It's to understand the problem, to be able to learn that connection with them. And then those little tiny things like seeing the bookmark bar or like what's in their background, there are funny things. I had one guy, he was, he was German and, right out of the gate, I work with a lot of people who are German. They're very structured and very well organized. So I think just find like culturally, they're a very organized group, personas like that. I just find generally that's a thing that I is pretty common. And then the second piece that is his white walls and white shelves, and his books are laying on the side. And so immediately there's this dichotomy in my mind. I'm like, white shelves and a white wall, which implies that very organized and neat. And then, but why are the books on their side? And I see this beautiful, gorgeous, thick Persian white cat come into the background and starts walking up these shelves up to the top, and it has a little perch at the very top. And all of a sudden, I understood everything. And I told him, I said,
Huh.
I'm gonna do a bit of analysis on you. I said, you're very astute because your books are on the side, probably because that cat has knocked them over more times than you would realize. So that's why you put them on their side. So it looks odd if you don't know the context, but it totally makes sense now that I know the context.
Mm.
And so the second thing is said, you have an incredible attention to detail. And he's like, well, how would you think that? I said, well, first of all, books on the side, and you have a white cat. No one has white furniture and a white cat if they don't have attention to detail.
That's
Because
so
it's like
interesting.
they're little different things that you can spot, so that when the data that led me to that call, like that's the stuff that I can focus on, because I like when we met, like I was so excited by what you were doing, but I want to learn about what made you do it. Because then that builds more understanding of why you did it to the intent that you have as a founder, that like you're
Very
not
true.
intending to head towards an exit. It was very much like you described the problem. You never talked about your financials. You never talked about ACVs of your own company. You just said like, this is the problem we solve. And like, I know it. It's the problem sucks. I had it. Like, fantastic. Let's keep talking about it. And you never left that. You always were like wrapped around the problem. Like, that's
Oh.
it. That's your intent, is to solve a problem. That's the greatest founder story ever.
Well, let's see. I would say let's see. I think I need like some book advice here from your end, like all these little clues, and like having the attention to detail on like the human psychology and like uh, social surroundings and surroundings. I don't know. Do you have anything you can recommend? I'm sure that a lot of listeners of your podcast would be curious to hear if there is something out there that we can read.
There's well, it's people always ask me this, and what's the best technology book you ever read? And I say DSM-4, the statistical, manual of disorders, because if you learn about people, you'll understand why technology is necessary. And that's it. Like it's a very people oriented business. Same like I used to play poker only because I decided it would be neat to learn. So I learned how to play Texas Hold'em, and then the first time I played, I came in second in a tournament, and it was driving people crazy in the tournament. I was working at a financial services company, and the people I'm playing against are literally like they have like you know $19 million houses. They have different $100,000 cars for each day of the week, and then their weekender is a $400,000 car. And I'm beating them at a finance game. Like they're trying to nudge me out of my money, and they're statistical gurus. But what was messing them up, why they couldn't beat me, was because they're like, what you're doing doesn't make sense. I'm like, exactly. Like, so you're looking for patterns. There's no pattern. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm figuring it out on the fly, but I'm watching their eyes. I'm watching their body movements, and I can tell what they're doing. So 5 hands in, I know everything about them, but I don't know anything about the statistics of cards. I'm dyslexic. I actually can't do real time math. So that's one of the problems I face. So my compensating, method for that was to learn behavioral, heuristics. And I didn't mean to. I
Wow.
just like learned it over time from like watching people and listening to people. And so like this is the worst podcast ever, because I've done, I've talked. I feel terrible because I've talked so much. This is why I know. I told you at the start, we gotta do a second podcast because there's so
Hey,
much
I'm
that I want to
in
dig
for
in.
it. I mean, there is so much to chat, and you have such a breadth of knowledge. It's really wonderful. So I actually love to listen to you.
That's
I'm
that
coming
is
to your
the
podcast to listen to you. See other
I know,
people
go
listen to
figure.
my
This is the first
podcast.
time I've ever been the subject of my own podcast, which is great. But to to really, as I know, because we've got to free you up, because you actually have as appropriately a busy schedule, because you do have, that's the founder story. We're recording, it's the 23rd of December, and people are probably going like, what do you, it must be nice to have the week, of relaxation. We're like, nope.
Oh God, no, no. I mean, I'm actually calling in from Europe, so that's hence it's super dark. I got like this screen blur. I don't know why it was automatic. Otherwise, you could explore my background. It's really pretty. Um, but yeah, I'm here in Germany, and today is my big podcast day. So I recorded already a bunch. But I really find it super interesting when I have podcasts with people from the go-to-market space, because actually I learn more on the podcast too. So it's
I
wonderful. It's
I
a
love
win-win.
that. Yeah. Well, and I think that's like when we look at where other people that we're in the industry with, it is funny how we find ourselves cross collaborating a lot. Like I said, so where we met was I worked with somebody who then post exit went to work for another company, and then I was just chatting with them potentially on doing some content work. But then they were doing their customer event, and they invited me just to show up to the customer event. I used to do event management, and help out around like tech communities. So I was like, "Oh, this is great." So I went there almost like an advisor to the event, and just to be a part of that, and then to meet you and such other amazing folks there who then have since had follow-up stuff. And inevitably 2-3 years from now we'll be on a podcast again talking about the next thing, or even the further growth of the current things. And this is what we do because we find birds of a feather. People are in a sort of community of practice, and what's missing, I find, is this community of practice, like founders, marketers, sales pros, like this, that GTM community of practice is not there yet. There's a few people that are trying. There are a few founder oriented, there are a few sales oriented, and there are a few marketing oriented. But in my mind, I think what we need is the trifecta. It's the that really is what it needs to be, is like the founder story, the seller story, and the marketer's ability to help those two get to their target. And this is why it is that it's like the project triangle, that you cannot have one
Absolutely.
without the other. You have to choose where you invest. Which two of the three do you get? It's really, really tough. So, but
It
like,
is. Uh, I'm thinking about your story about driving the car to the grocery store, because like I used to live in the Bay Area, and there we have self-driving cars now, right? But I mean, it's still, you're sitting still in a car and driving, even though we have self-driving cars. And if we think about that even how sales is or marketing is done today, it's you still don't have a GPS, kind of.
yeah,
So we are so far away from everything that is going to happen in the future, and I think that's like super exciting.
there you
And
go.
that's
Well,
why I
with
love
that,
your podcast, right?
well, and thank you for letting me be my own guest on my podcast and blather on about this stuff. But Jess, thank you. Really, I really do appreciate it, because this, like, I'm going to come out of here excited because we got to talk again. So you have a fantastic holiday break, even as minimal as it may be. But thank you so much. For folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way they can do this? And we're going to have a follow up, because we got to talk more about, we got to dig into Loyee much more, and just there's so many things we could talk about.
Absolutely. No, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very reachable there. And yeah, I think you will share anyways my contact data, but it's Jessica Pely, and I'm very easy to find. There are not so many Jessica Pelys. So yeah, looking forward to
And
hearing from you.
yeah, as somebody who had to go by DiscoPosse, because there's a lot of Eric Wrights in the world, so I didn't have a shot, especially because the main Eric Wright is Easy E. His name was Eric Wright. So if you look up Eric Wright, you're just going to get Easy E with two 9mm across his chest. So, but DiscoPosse, only one of those.
Only one of those, and I've been on them
So
on the podcast.
fantastic,
So
Jess.
amazing.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
thank you so much, Eric, for having me. And I cannot wait to meet you again in New York and chat more.
100%. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Let's catch up. Have a great end of year. And for folks, definitely check out Loyee. I'll have the link in here, as well as connections to connect with Jess. A true pleasure. And yeah, let's talk more. So much good stuff to share. Thank you very much for a great chat.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.